Disclaimer: all names, characters, and events in this video are fictional retellings of my experience. Any resemblance to real people and organizations is coincidental. Part 2, Chapter 1: Return to Mabalacat City and moving to other apartments. Hello, subscribers. A lot of time has passed since my previous video in February 2025, and the number of subscribers of this YouTube channel has almost doubled. If you are not familiar with me, it's because I am not the owner of the channel and became known accidentally at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, when my friend Leon filmed videos of me meeting girls on Walking Street. But the story is not about that. The story is about how I was poisoned in Angeles City, and for almost a year I was recovering my health. If you haven't watched the previous video, you can watch it via the link under the video. It will also appear somewhere in the upper right. It is dedicated to the technical side of the problem and was made in such a way as to attract the attention of Denner Department of Environment and Natural Resources. The video has subtitles in several languages. And in this series I will talk about the consequences of the poisoning, the treatment, and I will summarize how it even happened that I got into this unpleasant situation. For simplicity of narration, the place where I was poisoned we will call Casa Carlito, and the main culprit of my poisoning, mistoxicity. This is how I will designate the person whose decisions led to the appearance of toxic gases and to my poisoning. So, after I left for Olongapo in February 2025 and made the first part, I sent the link to the video to DNR, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, to the Angeles City Administration, and to the management of the apartments to which I moved with the purpose of explaining why I could not live in their apartments. To my surprise, they offered to return to me all 60,000 peso that I paid for 5 months of living and relocate me to another place. This was very good news because I was limited in money. I informed them that I was still in Olongapo and would return back to Angeles on Thursday, the 20th of February 2025. At the same time, I arranged to rent other apartments in Angeles City to the west of Casa Carlito because I assumed that since most ventilation openings of Casa Carlito are on the eastern side, then to the western side the gases would not go in such a high concentration as they were going to the eastern side to be sensed at a distance of several kilometers. To my regret, on the day of returning to Angeles City, when viewing the apartments, I was told that the minimum rental term was 3 months, although I was sure that they could be rented for 1 month, because previously the same ones were offered to me and the price of 23,000 peso per month was stated. But I was so unsure that I would be able to feel comfortable there that I was not ready to rent immediately for 3 months, because in the case of moving in a month, I would lose money for the remaining 2 months, that is to say, 46,000 pesos. Thus, I again found myself in a situation where I needed urgently to find a new place to live, and I had very little time. And not only because I could not sleep normally where I paid 60,000 pesos for 5 months, but also because I was given a condition to move out as soon as possible to free the room, and I had to urgently move somewhere so that my 60,000 pesos would be returned to me. It was February, available housing was still scarce, and I had to cling to the only option I found, a 1-bedroom apartment 7 kilometers north of Casa Carlito. I was sure that there definitely could not be any gases there. Besides, I was looking for housing to the west of Casa Carlito, in Deca Clark, and when I went there, entering the office, I was surprised how strongly it smelled of ammonia inside and how people could stay there. I returned from there with a severe headache. Thus, on February 23, Sunday, I rented an apartment in Mabalacat Poblacion where, as it seemed to me, there could not be any gases because it was too far from Casa Carlito. But as you have probably guessed, I could feel the gases even there and spent whole days with headaches. Already on the afternoon of February 25, I wrote a letter to several government organizations at once in which I asked them to pay attention to the problem of air pollution and indicated the address of the building Casa Carlito and gave a link to my first video in which I explained in detail where these gases come from. I received a reply only from DNR, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, in which it was said that I needed to send a signed letter to the address of the DNR office. But since I was not sure that I would not move again and not leave back to Russia, sending the letter made no sense, because the answer could come to me when I no longer lived there. Even in the new apartments, every day I felt hydrogen sulfide and ammonia, my head hurt, and I slept poorly at night. I thought that I needed to move to the south or southeast of Casa Carlito because the wind blows for about half a year in the direction from southwest to northeast, and the other half of the year in the opposite direction from northeast to southwest. If I lived in San Fernando, which is located southeast of Casa Carlito, then the gases definitely could not reach me. Thus, on Saturday, March 1, Leon took me to San Fernando and I spent the night in the Azure North high-rise tower, and the next morning I looked at a couple of rooms for long-term rent. But all these rooms turned out to be very tiny. I would not fit in them with my belongings, which had accumulated a lot over 2.5 years of living in the Philippines. Besides, I needed a place to work at the computer, and the room was very small. And in general, there was no confidence that after moving there, I would be able to feel normal there, and the contract was for 6 months, so in case of early moving out, I would lose money, and I had little money left anyway. I had to return from San Fernando back to the apartments in Mabalacat Poblacion. Perhaps you have seen this video under which someone left a comment that I had no joy on my face. But I am not a video blogger and therefore I have no obligation to appear in videos always in a good mood. My friend Leon decided to make a video about how we went to San Fernando, and I behaved naturally, not pretending on camera that everything was fine. I indeed looked crumpled, like a person who has headaches every day and sleeps poorly at night. On the same day when I returned from San Fernando on the 2nd of March 2025, I had to go sleep in a hotel because the apartment smelled strongly. But even in the hotel, I could not sleep normally because through the window-type air conditioner, the gases were penetrating into the room and I had to cover it with a towel. This was a room with windows facing south, and the gases were coming just from the south or southwest and were entering my room. Sleepless nights were followed by days when I walked in a state of derealization and depersonalization, as if all this was not happening to me and the world was not real at all. This feeling especially intensified in the evenings when the image was blurring. And all these days I continued to look for another housing, went to Clark where the air is cleaner, but even there I felt suffocating ammonia on the street. And since housing there cost about 30,000 pesos per month and the contract was for a year, it was too expensive for me because the losses in case of early moving out were too large. Because I still was not sure that I would be able to live there. Many times I had the desire to drop everything and fly to Russia, just to end this nightmare. But over 2.5 years of living in the Philippines, I had accumulated too many things, and even the thought of sorting these things caused depression, because there was no strength to do anything. As I could not sleep normally, and during the day I traveled to different places looking for housing to which I could move. At some point I understood that I could not continue living in these apartments and decided that I would return to Russia after all. But in order to return to Russia, I needed to get rid of unnecessary things. And so I bought a ticket to Boracay. Firstly, to leave the zone of ammonia and hydrogen sulfide poisoning, which, as I sometimes felt, reached my apartment 7 kilometers north of Casa Carlito. And secondly, to sell my kites and free space in the bag for things to return to Russia with it. Chapter 2, Boracay. So I bought a ticket for March 6 and booked a hotel for 10 nights, assuming that during this time I would find a buyer and be able to sell my kites and maybe also my kite surfing board, and after returning to Mabalacat buy a ticket to Russia and start packing my things. But the next day on Boracay I took my kites out of the bag and discovered that they were damaged. Due to long storage in a folded state in a hot climate, several tubes connecting the central bladder to the struts had melted and come off. The kites required repair. It was impossible to sell them, and the repair was expensive, since I was told that the entire bladder inside the kite had to be replaced, not just the tubes that act as valves between the bladders. It turned out that I flew to Boracay for nothing because I would not be able to sell the kites. But returning back earlier made no sense either, because the hotel was paid for 10 nights and the return ticket was bought for March 16. But what was even stranger, even on Boracay, I felt headaches, and in the second half of the day, sitting in McDonald's, I smelled ammonia inside the room and the headache intensified. I thought maybe I had liver problems and that's why my head hurt, and the pain worsened after I ate chicken at McDonald's, because chicken is protein, and protein food puts stress on the liver and kidneys. And if the liver is not okay, the blood does not have time to purify, and that is why a headache appears after eating at McDonald's. The next morning, I went to a laboratory and did a blood test. To my surprise, my liver was fine and could not be the cause of the headache. Then I tried to do a few more blood tests, but only one was available to me. And although its results were more or less normal, I was confused that the amount of hemoglobin inside the red blood cells was below normal, and possibly this was the cause of the headaches. Because I assumed that due to a lack of hemoglobin inside the red blood cells, little oxygen reaches the brain and this causes a headache. But I would have to deal with this later, after returning to Mabalacat. After several days on Boracay, I noticed that every day afternoon it began to smell of ammonia outside, and especially strongly in the western part of the island inside McDonald's, and on the western coast inside cafes and restaurants located on White Beach. I had only one explanation. The source of the ammonia was somewhere on a nearby island. But since in March the wind blows from east to west, sometimes from northeast to southwest, and there were no islands to the east, only Carabao Island located north of Boracay remained, or Boracay itself, its northern part. Once I saw some smoke in the northern part of the island and decided to go there and check what kind of smoke it was. This road was familiar to me because in 2012, when I came to Boracay to kitesurf, I lived exactly on the hill. I reached the very hotel where I stayed in 2012 and 2013. It looked abandoned. Several more hotels along the way were also abandoned. Either this happened back in 2018 when the island was closed by environmentalists for restoration, or during COVID-19, but several hotels in the northern part of the island were abandoned. In the morning, before my hike up the hill, after reviewing the blood test results once again, I realized that they indicated an inflammatory process in the body. I decided to buy prednisone, which had been prescribed to me a month earlier for 7 days. These tablets could not be taken constantly because they suppress the immune system and raise blood sugar, but it seemed to me that if the blood test results indicated an inflammatory process in the body, then I could take them again for 7 days, since a month had already passed since the first time I took them. Thus, passing by several abandoned hotels, I reached the viewpoint and climbed up. A strong sea wind was blowing from the east, the air felt fresh, without traces of ammonia. This was very good, because now I knew where I could breathe fresh air. Somewhere in the south, one could see Bulabog Beach and the people who were kitesurfing. In the north, several residential houses that I had not seen before when I came to Boracay in 2013. As the heavy rain began, I had to go down one level and wait until it ended. I settled into a hammock and simply enjoyed the fresh air, which was so necessary for me, since there was no fresh air either in the apartments I rented in Mabalacat or even on Boracay in its central part, which is located at the foot of the hill. There were still 2 days left before returning to Mabalacat City, and I went up the hill several more times to breathe fresh air there. Chapter 3: The Treatment. I arrived at Clark Airport on the 16th of March 2025 early in the morning and got to the apartments in Mabalacat Poblacion. Strangely enough, the following week went more or less normally, and although sometimes I felt the smell of ammonia and hydrogen sulfide, it did not lead to headaches like before, and I felt fine up until Sunday, the 23rd of March 2025. That day there was a billiards game, and since I continued to participate in the billiards leagues, I arrived at the game as usual on Sunday at 6 p.m. Everything was normal that day, but already during the game I became significantly worse. My head was spinning, the image was blurry, I was unable to concentrate on the shot and made many mistakes. All games, I lost myself because of my mistakes. That day I had to leave home earlier than usual, because as a player I was useless to the team and was losing game after game. When I got to the apartments, the image was blurry and my head hurt badly. I just lay down on the bed to fall asleep, but because of the pain it was impossible. The headache was so strong that it felt like my eyes were about to pop out, like the hero of the movie about the planet Mars. I wanted to just disappear, as long as the pain ended as soon as possible. One part of me whispered, "Enough, it's time to end everything, you know how you can do it." But another part protested, "Why exactly should you disappear? while Miss Toxicity will live as before and will continue to travel to Japan and South Korea and won't even find out that you are no longer here. Frightening images appeared in my mind, which I cannot talk about because of YouTube rules and probably shouldn't. Now I understand that these were not real desires, but desperate attempts of the psyche to protect itself from pain and helplessness. These were mind games, not decisions. The main task of any living organism is to survive, and that was exactly the task performed by the second part of me, which protested about the injustice that I would disappear while Miss Toxicity would continue to live. My head was splitting with pain. I took a pill to lower blood pressure and soon fell asleep. And in the morning, when I woke up, I realized that yesterday I became worse not just like that, but because the pills I had started taking back on Boracay had run out about 3 days earlier, which meant that they were helping me, but now their effect had ended and the headache returned. It became clear that returning to Russia made no sense, because if I felt bad without the pills, then I would feel bad in Russia too. And there was no difference whether I was being treated in Russia or in the Philippines. Besides, I did not want to return to Russia because of the war between Russia and Ukraine. So that you understand why I did not want to return to Russia, I should say that in Russia I lived in a city located 95 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, and from my home you could drive to Ukraine in 2 hours by car. The war between Russia and Ukraine, which began in 2014 but was paused, entered an acute phase in February 2022 and forced me to leave for the Philippines. Now, when it became clear that there were pills that at least somehow helped me, returning to Russia made no sense, because both there and here I would feel equally bad without treatment. But here at least there was no war. Now, the main task was to visit a doctor and tell him that the pills I had been taking helped me, but since they suppress the immune system and cannot be taken for a long time, I hoped the doctor would prescribe something else without such side effects. The next day, I went to the immigration bureau and extended my visa for another 2 months, as I finally decided to stay in the Philippines. And a few days later, I visited a neurologist, told him how I had been poisoned with hydrogen sulfide, ozone, and ammonia from October 2024 to January 2025. The doctor performed several tests, asked me to close my eyes, and gave me different smells to sniff the smell of vanilla, vinegar, orange, and something else. I perfectly recognized all the smells offered by the doctor, even though I felt the smell of ammonia and hydrogen sulfide indoors and outdoors, especially after lunch when it got hot. The doctor explained to me that I had olfactory hallucinations. Admit it honestly. What do you imagine when you hear the word hallucinations? I too imagined hallucinations as some visual effects that occur in a person who has taken hallucinogenic mushrooms or LSD-25. The very concept of olfactory hallucinations was new to me and explained a lot. Before that moment, I was sure that the smell of ammonia was present in my apartments, in McDonald's, outside, but now it became clear that it only seemed to me, and in fact these smells were not there. But that does not mean that they were never there at all. Starting from the 14th of October 2024, when I began living in Casa Carlito, the smell of hydrogen sulfide was present both in the Casa Carlito building and even on Walking Street. Because hydrogen sulfide was emitted from the top floor of the Casa Carlito building from the executive suites, and since it is heavier than air, it spread along the ground and reached Walking Street. The same with the smell of ammonia later, from late December 2024 to early January 2025, which was coming from the room across where a Filipina woman with children lived. And the children who were coughing not just like that, but exactly because of the ammonia. So olfactory hallucinations are what I began experiencing only after I left Casa Carlito. Thus, the doctor explained to me that the fact that I smell things does not mean that they are there, and he prescribed me for 3 weeks other pills similar to the ones I had taken before, but they could be taken for a longer period. Although this was still not a victory and I still felt the smells of ammonia and hydrogen sulfide from time to time, now I understood that they were not real and my head no longer hurt as badly as before, although various unpleasant effects persisted. Chapter 4, Moving Again. Although after I started taking the pills I began to feel better, I was still looking for other apartments to live in, because in this one it was difficult to breathe. It felt like I was breathing some kind of dust and that a lump of fur was stuck in my throat. Later, I realized that this was because the apartment was located close to the main road, and since there was construction outside the window and between the window and the neighboring building, there was now a narrow space. The Venturi effect increased the airspeed in this narrow space, and exhaust gases from the road were being sucked into the space between my windows and the building under construction, and this dirty air entered my apartment through the gaps in the windows. And so, on the 3rd of April 2025, I moved into an apartment near Walking Street. Perhaps you have seen this video. There I installed my air conditioner and lived for a week. But this room was located at the very end of the alley and I lacked fresh air. I felt the smell of sewage, and after just a week I moved to another room, more spacious, located 60 meters west of the previous one. But I couldn't live there for long either because I felt the smell of ammonia and other sewage odors that irritated me and caused headaches. Every evening I went for a walk on Walking Street to breathe fresh air, but this only helped for a short time after the walk ended. When I walked down the street, I had a feeling of unreality of what was happening, as if all this was not happening to me at all. It was derealization and depersonalization, automatic defenses of the psyche. Probably everyone has been in this state. Remember when you haven't slept for 48 hours or slept very little, for example, during a long journey with several flights connecting in different airports. But I didn't want to sleep. It was just a strange feeling that the world around was not real and I was not myself. The pills that the doctor prescribed for 21 days ended, and at my own risk I bought a few more pills, because on one hand I was afraid that without the pills the headache would return as it did in March, a week after I returned from Boracay, and on the other hand I could not take these pills for a long time because their side effect was immune suppression and an increase in blood sugar. And on the 24th of April 2025, I moved again, now to a room located far from Walking Street in Marisol, Ninoy Aquino Barangay. This did not help me. I still sensed sewage smells there, although I installed a valve in the drain hole so that the smell from the sewage system would not enter the room. Also, my mistake was that I moved into a room on the top floor where all the walls except one were external and it heated up from three sides and from the roof, and the air conditioner was installed so that it was directed strictly at the entrance door and cooled the room poorly. In addition, the walls outside were painted in a dark color and absorbed a lot of heat from the sun's rays and released this heat inside the room all day. The room worked like a trap, like a greenhouse where heat entered from outside and stayed forever, and even though the air conditioner worked all day, it couldn't handle the heat. But the heat was not the main problem. The main problem was the sewage smells, which caused severe headaches. If you or your relative has never had a mental disorder, then you are unlikely to understand my condition. My friend Leon said several times that I needed to buy a motorbike to ride, since I now lived far away. But even he did not understand my condition, and I explained several times that I did not need any motorbike because I would crash on it. Although I had driving experience and rode a motorbike in 2012-2014 when I lived in Thailand, the problem was not only that I had headaches, but also that my vision was blurry. And in that state, it would be very dangerous to ride, especially in a country where people break rules and sometimes may drive on the oncoming lane. Honestly, driving on the oncoming lane irritated me even as a pedestrian, because before crossing the road, I absolutely did not expect someone to drive towards me from the right, and this had already happened several times. On the contrary, I tried to walk as much as possible and use transport as little as possible. And since I continued to participate in billiard leagues and played billiards several times a week, at least 30 minutes a day, I walked to get to the place where the game would take place. It would seem that if I felt unwell, I should have stayed at home, but everything worked exactly the opposite. When I stayed at home, I suffocated from the sewage smell and the headache intensified. And when I went to play billiards, I chose in the bar where the game took place, a quiet, peaceful place where I could sit, lean my back against a chair or a wall, and relax while listening to meditation in my headphones. This really sometimes helped. The chaos in my head quieted down and I entered a relaxed state in which I played well, but this didn't happen always. There were days when the image was blurry and it was difficult to play. I made many mistakes and lost. I even came up with 4 outcomes of the game. I lost, I won, opponent won. Unlike the options, I won and I lost. My 4 variants described the character of the game more accurately. For example, when I played poorly and made many mistakes, I called it I lost. That was not the same as opponent won, because opponent won meant that he played very well and won by his own good play. And that was different from I lost when I made mistake after mistake and lost by myself. There were also games in which both I and the opponent made mistakes, and if the opponent made more and lost, then one could say about such a game, opponent lost, but I could not say I won about such a game. I could say I won only about those games in which I played well, made at most 1-2 mistakes per game and won, but this did not happen often and depended on my condition. The quality of the game was very unstable, but from the outside, it was probably difficult to understand that something was wrong with me, because people saw that I had 2 arms, 2 legs. I regularly came to games, so everything seemed fine, but no one guessed about the chaos happening in my head, and they could realize that something was wrong only if I made a large number of mistakes in simple situations. There were days when I walked down the street and my vision was so blurry that I might not notice someone waving at me until they came up and stopped right in front of me. But to be honest, I didn't want to talk to anyone. Because of constant headaches and olfactory hallucinations, I became angry and irritable. I was in a bad mood and I didn't want to talk to anyone. Mentally, I aged by about 30 years and turned into a constantly dissatisfied old man who sometimes didn't even understand where he was or what was happening. I didn't want to show that I was in a bad mood, and I wouldn't have been able to maintain a conversation in a foreign language. English is not my native language, and it is still difficult for me to communicate in it, especially in the condition in which I was in those days. Closer to May 10, the sewage smells in the room, and headaches became so strong that I started looking for a place to move. I found where the sewage smell might have been coming from, and perhaps you have seen this video with explanations. But no matter how I tried to seal the doors and windows, nothing helped. I went to look at new housing where rooms were offered, but I didn't like it. Not only because it was small, but also because it was unclear whether I would be able to live there normally. The way the drain hose was connected to the sink was incorrect, and there was a concern that sewage smells would enter the room. I decided that the place I should move to must be built according to construction standards and intended for foreigners, so that there would be no holes in the road near the house from which sewage smells would come out. And all pipe connections inside the housing must be done correctly. I looked for inexpensive housing because I was limited in money, but it had to be good quality. I found housing, although it was expensive for me, but there was no 1-year contract and it was possible to pay monthly. By mid-May, the headaches became so unbearable that I simply had to move somewhere, not waiting for the end of the first month of living. Every time I ran from smells and headaches and moved earlier than the end of the rental period, and all these numerous moves led to financial losses. In one place, I moved 3 weeks early, in another 1 week early, and there they scammed me with the electricity payment, charging 33% more than I had actually used, and now I was moving 10 days early. But since this was housing rented with a 1-year contract, in addition to these 10 days, I was also losing 1 month of payment. All these months since late January 2025, I could not work, because when I tried to sit at the computer, the headaches and dizziness began and I literally fell off the chair. Because of the war between Russia and Ukraine, my investments were blocked, so I had to earn money remotely. And since because of health problems I could not work, I had to spend the small amount of savings I had. But trips to Olongapo, to Boracay, and frequent moves exhausted my financial reserves, and I had only a non-touchable amount left for a return ticket to Russia, which I was not allowed to spend, so as not to end up with no money and no possibility to return to Russia, as had happened to other foreigners. I hoped to find a place to live and return to work, but it didn't work out. It was the first time I had to borrow money, because to move in, I had to pay a refundable deposit, and I no longer had enough of my own money. The situation looked catastrophic, and after the move, I decided that if I couldn't live here either, I would have to drop everything and go to Russia, even though I didn't want to. I already said that in Russia I lived less than 100 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. Over the years I lived in the Philippines, the situation in Russia became worse and I didn't want to return there. Perhaps you are watching me from the USA. I will try to explain with an example. Imagine that in 2016 Donald Trump became the president And all this time since 2016, he remained the president and would continue to be until 2028, that is 12 years in a row. It does not matter whether you are a Republican or a Democrat or even from another country, you may imagine another president, your favorite, the one you would like to see as president in your country. Just multiply these 12 years of rule by 2 and get 24 years of rule. That is approximately how long Putin has ruled Russia from 2000 until the moment I am writing this script, November 2025. Over these more than 20 years, there was no independent television or radio left in Russia where the truth would be told. All television in Russia became completely under the control of the president, and since around 2013 Russians were being turned against Ukraine, and so it happened that the older generation of Russians who watched TV believed in these television fairy tales and now support the war. For me, the war in Ukraine was a shock, and I was immediately against the war because I understood that it was a catastrophe for Russia and for the young generation. But my parents ended up on the other side and supported the war because they had watched TV for more than 10 years and did not understand any arguments. Thus, the war divided families, and my case is not an exception but rather the rule. The older generation is for the war and the younger is against. And after I left for the Philippines, my mother said that I was a traitor to the motherland. But no one attacked my motherland, so this is not the war in which I should participate, and I do not consider myself a traitor. Therefore, you may understand that no one in Russia was waiting for me, and I didn't want to return there. And so, on the 15th of May 2025, I moved into a newly constructed building that was located literally 50 meters from the place where I had lived a year earlier. The apartment was fully furnished and I sold my large things, the bed with the mattress, the refrigerator, the air conditioner, because they became unnecessary and I was tired of moving them from place to place. I cannot say that with my move the problems ended. Although in the new place there was no sewage smell like in the previous one, there was instead a persistent smell of construction dust, silicone sealant, and exhaust fumes from the nearby road. I had to spend a day cleaning the room of construction dust and also cleaning the air conditioner. And still I often sensed foreign smells and had headaches. I had to start taking the anti-inflammatory pills again, which the doctor had prescribed, but since I understood that I could not take them for long, in early June I went back to the doctor again. Chapter 5: Real Treatment. The doctor forbade me to take the pills because I had already been taking them for too long and it was dangerous, since they lead to a decrease in immunity and an increase in blood sugar. But most importantly, the doctor ordered an MRI of the brain. This once again put me before a dilemma: return to Russia and get treatment there or do the MRI in the Philippines. In the end, I had to borrow money once again because I had no money for an MRI of the brain. What I feared most was that it would be a useless waste of money and the brain MRI would turn out to be an unnecessary procedure and find nothing, leaving it unclear what was wrong with me. I decided to do the MRI, and if the situation did not become clearer, then I would leave for Russia. But already the next day after the MRI, the verdict was unambiguous: bilateral atrophy of the olfactory bulbs. To help you understand, the olfactory bulbs are sections of the brain located in the front part of the head above the nose. The whole picture of what happened became clear. I understood that just as ammonia and ozone burned the track in the ribbon cable of my laptop's keyboard and 6 keys stopped working, these gases also burned the areas of the brain that were on the path of the gases because I was breathing through my nose, and the ammonia and ozone were passing right by the olfactory bulbs, burning them along the way. I also understood exactly when this happened, the 29th of January 2025. If you remember from the first part, in January, I was forced to leave for Thailand just to escape for a while from the gas exposure zone. I returned from Thailand on January 27 and everything was fine with me. And in the evening of January 27, I received a message that I was being forcibly evicted from the apartments where the gases were and I had to vacate the room by the end of January. Already the next day, I found an apartment and Leon helped me move part of my things, and the rest Leon and I moved on January 29. First we moved the large things, removed the air conditioner from the wall, took the bag with the kite surfing equipment, and then I returned to the apartment to pack the rest of my belongings. And it was exactly then, I am sure, that I damaged the olfactory bulbs. I remember that while packing my things, I had to rinse my eyes with water many times because the ammonia was corroding them and causing burning in my eyes. But I couldn't just drop everything and leave. I had to pack the remaining things and get out of that cursed place. Since the air conditioner was already removed, the gases were entering the room through the hole in the wall and causing burning in the eyes and burning in the lungs. The burning in my chest remained with me even the next day after finishing the move. And it was exactly the next day after the move that the problems began. It seemed to me that even in the new apartment it smelled like ammonia, and this began the series of moves from place to place, which led me to the point where I had to get an MRI of the brain. Thus, it became clear that part of my brain had been burned by the gases, and the doctor prescribed treatment for 100 days, although he warned that in my case, full recovery could take from 6 to 12 months. So, only at the beginning of June 2025 did real treatment begin, not just stopping the brain inflammation. The treatment was planned for 100 days, but in reality, even after those 100 days, the effect was insignificant. I still experienced olfactory hallucinations as well as vision problems. Sometimes the effect was like HPPD, hallucinogen, persisting perception disorder. The image blurred, became unclear, moved. No wonder someone from the subscribers said that I didn't notice them when walking down the street, and indeed I didn't want to talk to anyone because I had a bad mood and constant stress, which was difficult to control. The very mechanism of olfactory hallucinations led to stress because the signal from the olfactory bulbs goes to the amygdala and hypothalamus, triggering anxiety, even though there were no real smells and only olfactory hallucinations, but the brain received signals as if the smells were real. The hallucinations became especially strong after rain with high humidity, and I was also irritated by the purple light that was used in some of the bars where billiard games were held. Of course, this negatively affected the quality of my game, and I tried to spend as little time as possible inside such bars when I had to play there. Sometimes my hands trembled as in Parkinson's disease. It felt like during these few months after the poisoning, I aged about 30 years and received problems not only with the brain but also with the body. Additional stress came from lack of money. It was difficult to plan anything more than a month ahead, and I didn't know whether I would stay in the Philippines or would be forced to go to Russia. I had to borrow a few more $1,000 so that I could at least plan my life in the Philippines for 6 months. In July, I once again moved to another apartment, which allowed me to reduce expenses because now I paid $250 a month for the apartment and about another $250 for food and about $100 a month for treatment. I always cooked food at home not only because it was cheaper, but also because I had to take supplements and medications prescribed by the doctor. Every morning and evening, I took several different supplements for the brain and pills to relax the body's muscles, because constant stress caused tension in the body. Thus passed the 100 days of my treatment, and on the 14th of September 2025, I took the last 100th capsule. This was the day when Miss Toxicity, together with other employees of Casa Carlito, celebrated 1 year since the opening. Such a coincidence that made me angry, because they were celebrating there and didn't even suspect what problems they had created for me with their actions. And although there was improvement in my health, it was still too early to speak of full recovery. These few months of stress had exhausted me greatly, and I was very angry with Miss Toxicity for the fact that instead of solving the gas problem, she simply kicked me out, and now because of her my life had turned into hell. This was my personal hell, which people around me could not even guess about, because externally I looked normal. 2 arms, 2 legs, head, everything in place. But what was happening in my gas-burned brain no one suspected, and I couldn't talk about it, because I needed to make a video explaining what had happened to me. And any attempt to work at the computer caused dizziness. And only now, in November 2025, I had the opportunity to do it. So, the 100 days of treatment ended, and 4 days later I visited the doctor again and explained my symptoms to him. He prescribed a new medication and extended the use of the previous one for another 60 days. Fortunately, the second medication gave a quick effect and reduced dizziness, although the olfactory hallucinations themselves did not disappear, because their mechanism was in the damage of the myelin sheath of neurons, and its recovery takes several months, but at least now I could work at the computer and not fall from the chair due to dizziness. Chapter 6: What happened to me? Analysis of the events. Perhaps you have already wondered, how did I let this happen and why didn't I leave Casa Carlito earlier if I knew it was dangerous to live there? This is the so-called trap of sticking, which scientifically is called the escalation of commitment bias or sunk cost fallacy. It may seem that this story began on the 14th of October 2024 when I started living in Casa Carlito and they began poisoning me with hydrogen sulfide, releasing it onto the balcony of my room from above, from the executive suites room. But in fact, it began back in September 2024 when I made the decision to move to Casa Carlito and started buying everything necessary for living: a bed, mattress, air conditioner, refrigerator, everything I needed to live there. Since I rented an empty room, I had already invested in this place and it was difficult to drop everything and leave for another place. In addition, according to the contract, I had to pay a penalty for leaving earlier than the end of the contract, meaning that besides the money spent on furniture, I would also lose the deposit for almost 3 months if I left after just 1 month of living there. Moreover, I mistakenly believed that after I explained the essence of the problem and how it could be fixed, the building management would realize the danger and fix the problem. But most likely, because of a poor level of education, the words hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and ozone meant nothing to them, even though I explained in writing that these gases are toxic, meaning dangerous to health. If you were in my place, you might also think that it's foolish to leave, since the problem could be solved very easily by reinstalling the grease traps, which I described in detail in the first part, and that it was only necessary to fix the problem and live normally afterwards. But because nobody solved the problem, in November 2024 I asked a direct question: when will you stop poisoning me with hydrogen sulfide by releasing it from the executive suites room onto the balcony of the third floor room where I live? Neither Miss Toxicity nor her brother nor the foreman gave me any answer to this question. And in such a situation of uncertainty, I accepted the offer to move to another room on the fifth floor in the northern part of the building, and I was sure that no one from above would release toxic gases onto me anymore. And for some time, everything was more or less okay. However, Miss Toxicity listened to my claim that she was poisoning me with hydrogen sulfide from her room. After all, if she turned on the exhaust fan in the executive suites every night at 3-4 a.m., then it wasn't without reason. It was because gases entered her room through an open drain, and the exhaust fan allowed her to get rid of them by releasing them outside, from where they reached my balcony in the room where I lived. Thus, Miss Toxicity forced the plumbers to reinstall the grease trap in her room and stopped poisoning herself with gas and releasing it outdoors. But this did not solve the problem for the other residents, because in the other rooms the drainage system was open and gases from the septic tank escaped through open sewer pipes in other rooms. And even if in the southern part of the building, where the executive suites were located, the pipes were fixed, in the northern part they still remained open, and gases reached my room on the fifth floor in the northern part of the building. It is very upsetting that Miss Toxicity did not suffer, while I lost a whole year of normal life. I wish she had been poisoned by the gases the same way she poisoned me, and had gone through what I had to endure during this entire year of 2025. There is a saying in Russia: the way you meet the new year is the way you will spend it. That is exactly what happened to me. Starting from Friday, the 27th of December 2024 until Thursday, the 2nd of January 2025, I lived as if in hell, and the entire year of 2025 turned into hell. That new year, ammonia was coming from the room across the hall on the fifth floor where I lived. There was no one to complain to because the entire building management had gone away for the New Year holidays. I described this in the first part, how children in that room were coughing, and later, when the open sewer pipe in that room was closed, I watched two Filipinas packing their things into garbage bags because their belongings had absorbed the ammonia smell. As I already said, in January I was kicked out of those apartments, and the last straw in my poisoning was the day of the move, the 29th of January 2025, when I was packing my things and ammonia with ozone entered the room through the hole left by the removed air conditioner. Although I smelled ammonia and it irritated my eyes, forcing me to wash them frequently with water, The real damage to my health was caused not by ammonia, but by ozone. Ozone has a slightly sweet smell with a metallic aftertaste. But since ammonia has a very sharp smell, I simply did not smell the ozone. The smell of ozone was masked by the sharp smell of ammonia. By the way, it was ozone, not ammonia, that caused 6 keys on my laptop keyboard to fail in early January 2025. It was not a random set of keys, but a very specific one. These 6 keys shared one single trace on the keyboard ribbon cable, and this trace failed because of ozone oxidation. Later in November, when I was writing the script for this video, my laptop broke. It simply stopped booting. As it turned out, one of the SSD modules had failed. I am sure this was not a random event, but also a consequence of ozone exposure. Most likely, oxidation of some tracks on one SSD module occurred, and after several months it simply stopped working. I lost the data stored on that SSD, but I was able to restore the laptop by removing the damaged module and reinstalling the system on the remaining working SSD module. So, on that day when I was packing my things in January 2025, ozone damaged the myelin sheaths of my brain neurons. After all, the brain is like an interweaving of wires, neuron, and the myelin sheath of a neuron is like insulation. When the insulation is damaged, the signal leaks from one neuron to neighboring ones. Something like a short circuit occurs. It is like a bundle of wires with damaged insulation, and a signal intended for one wire spreads to neighboring wires. This is what caused my vision to blur, because signals responsible for processing smells leaked to adjacent neurons responsible for vision, and the distorted signal went into the visual cortex. And vice versa, visual signals could cause olfactory hallucinations, disorders of the vestibular system, which could explain why it was difficult for me to work on a computer and why I felt dizzy. One might think that if ozone burned the olfactory bulbs and they decreased in size, I should have stopped smelling anything. But the opposite occurred. I began to feel smells so strongly that they overloaded my brain and caused headaches. Apparently, this happened exactly because signals from the receptors responsible for smell perception leaked into neighboring neurons, enhancing them. And the amplified signal traveled not through one neuron but through several at once, as if in a bundle of wires with damaged insulation. And the signal meant for one wire began spreading through the entire bundle and reached its destination many times stronger. The treatment the doctor prescribed restored the myelin sheath of neurons, meaning the neurons gradually restored their insulation, and signal leakage from one neuron to another decreased day by day. But this process stretched over 6 months already. By the way, if you haven't watched the first part and are wondering where ozone in the building came from, I'll explain. It was generated inside the septic tank on the ground floor and was intended to oxidize inorganic waste that could enter the drainage system. The septic tank, built using the BioGreen advanced oxidation process, is connected to electricity specifically to generate ozone from oxygen using high voltage discharges and to decompose sewer waste with ozone. And since the sewer pipes in the northern part of the building were still open, ozone easily penetrated through them into the building. And hydrogen sulfide and ammonia are natural decomposition products of protein waste in the sewer system. And if the septic tank environment becomes alkaline, ammonia is released instead of hydrogen sulfide. All of these gases are dangerous to the nervous system, although they act differently. Why was I unable to solve the gas problem and ended up suffering from it? I believe Miss Toxicity is to blame because she made all the decisions, possibly without understanding the full danger due to a lack of education. Her brother, as it turned out, is a completely useless person who decides nothing, and the foreman, who was responsible for calculating electricity and water payments, was merely an executor, and even if he understood something, he could hardly take any actions on his own. I relied on communicating with the men, assuming they would be more technically knowledgeable, but this was useless. And when it became clear that they did not understand the essence of the problem, even after I had explained it several times, both orally and in writing, I asked them to invite the specialists who installed the septic tank and could understand what was happening, to which I received the response that they had invited them, but it might take 3 weeks. Even though in this situation the problem needed to be solved as quickly as possible. I did not mention this in the first part, but Leon and I went ourselves in early December 2024 to the organization that installed the septic system in Casa Carlito, and I explained the problem to them and asked them to come and check and explain to the building management what exactly needed to be done to fix the issue. I don't know whether they showed up or not, but the very fact that they knew gases were leaking from the septic tank and entering the living premises should have motivated them to take some action, since they certainly must be aware of the danger of inhaling ozone and should be interested in fixing the gas leak to preserve their operating license. As you can see, I tried to invite specialists myself after 3 weeks had passed, but even that did not solve the problem. I developed my own perception of what was happening and my understanding of who Miss Toxicity is. Perhaps this is the case of money spoils people, and having been born into a wealthy family, she became used to having all her wishes obeyed instantly, turning into a selfish woman who doesn't care about other people. And if such people like me bother her with complaints that interfere with her vacations in Japan or South Korea, instead of fixing the problem in the building owned by her mother, she would rather get rid of the person who informs her of these problems. This is just my assumption, but I think that after the completion of the basic construction of the building, Miss Toxicity wanted to handle the interior finishing of the rooms herself and saved money on construction workers and plumbers. I already mentioned that in addition to improperly installed grease traps in all rooms, which caused gases to leak from the sewer system into the rooms, the ventilation system was also installed incorrectly, and humid air from the bathroom leaked through torn ventilation pipes into the space above the ceiling and between rooms instead of going outside. Of course, in a few years this will lead to mold and fungus on the walls, but she most likely does not even suspect what violations were made during the final stage of construction, although the signs were obvious. Even the rust inside the elevator after just 1 month of the building's official opening should have been a clear signal that something was wrong. Elevators do not rust from the inside that quickly under normal conditions. This happened due to circulation of ozone and hydrogen sulfide, which were being released from the executive suites downward to the ground floor, then pulled up the staircase and through the elevator shaft. Inside the elevator, it smelled of dead animals. That was the smell of hydrogen sulfide. But instead of eliminating the cause of the smell, they simply installed an air freshener inside the elevator and didn't even understand the meaning behind my question when I asked. For what reason did you install an air freshener inside the elevator? Yes, it was a simple question, the answer to which could have brought them closer to the correct actions. But instead, they simply laughed at me and said, "It's just an air freshener." I already mentioned in the first part that in January 2025, before my trip to Thailand, I sent a letter to the building's owner. It is quite possible that the letter I sent never reached its intended recipient, and Miss Toxicity, who was at the same address at that time, received the letter herself and decided to deal with me on her own, simply kicking me out of the building belonging to her mother, even though the letter was addressed not to her but to her mother. So it is quite possible that the building's owner, her mother, never received my letter and does not know about the gas problems and my request to fix them. I would not worry about this if my problems had ended after I left that place, but the irony is that the biggest problems began precisely after I left and have continued for 10 months already. Yes, more than 10 months have passed since I was kicked out of Casa Carlito, 6 of which I have been undergoing treatment, but I still have not returned to normal life, the life I had before the poisoning. The result is sad. A broken laptop, numerous relocations, and the inability to earn money remotely due to poor health have led me to huge debts, even though I try to live modestly on $600 per month. Will I be able to return to a normal life? And when I don't know, but for now unpleasant symptoms remain. Under the first video someone wrote, "You should be compensated." Yes, by all logic I should be compensated, but the Philippines is not Singapore and not even Hong Kong, where after the skyscraper fires the heads of the construction company were arrested. It would be naive to expect justice in the Philippines. And although if the mother of Miss Toxicity had enough money to build a 6-story building, it was surely not her last money, and she has dozens or even hundreds of millions more. I doubt I reveal any secret by saying that in the Philippines everything works differently. Whoever has more money wins the legal dispute. So I may be 200% right in this situation, may provide all medical documents confirming that ozone damaged my brain, but I will likely still lose unless this story gains wide publicity. For example, on Rafi Tulfo's channel. The only thing left to hope for is that DENR, Department of Environment and Natural Resources, takes an interest in this case and forces them to fix everything, because just as I suffered from the gas leaks, other residents of the building may suffer too, and quite possibly already have since I left after 3 months of living there, while other people may have lived there for a whole year. But at least I understood what exactly caused my health problems and could explain to the doctor that I had lived in a zone of toxic gas exposure. Other people may simply not understand what happened to them and continue living in a zone of dangerous contamination, because, as I already realized, Filipinos are not very sensitive to smells, and where I smelled even the faintest ozone, they might not smell even strong ammonia or hydrogen sulfide, as happened one night in November 2024 with the guard on the ground floor, who threw up several times but most likely did not even understand that it was from hydrogen sulfide being released from the executive suites onto the ground floor where he sat near the elevator. What conclusion can be drawn from my story? I drew one simple conclusion. It is better to rent housing not from private individuals but from organizations, and the housing should be fully furnished so that you can easily move to another place if necessary without dragging a bed, mattress, refrigerator, and air conditioner with you. It was exactly the fact that I was burdened by a contract and had bought many large items that prevented me from leaving quickly for another place when it became clear that the toxic gas problem would not be solved as quickly as it should. Have been considering how dangerous those gases were to health. I do not expect justice to prevail and those responsible to be punished. This is a long bureaucratic process that I do not even want to start. I only want the hell and nightmare that I went through in 2025 to be left behind as a memory of a difficult period of my life, and in 2026 to get my normal life back, the life I had before the poisoning, to return to work, pay off my debts, start traveling again, and enjoy life as I used to. If you are willing to support me financially, you can do so in various ways. Those commonly used in the Philippines: GCash, Maya; in the United States, PayPal; in European countries, or simply with a bank card through the Buy Me a Coffee service. I will leave the links under the video. Thank you for watching my story.
At Casa Carlito, the air's gone sour. Whispers of danger in every hour. Walls stained yellow like a warning sign. You're breathing deep, it's the devil's design. Hydrogen sulfide kisses, ozone's cruel bites. Ammonia dances in the dead of night. Casa Carlito, where the shadows choke. The air is poison, every breath's a joke. Casa Carlito, where the gas clouds bloom. One step inside, you're sealing your doom. Windows scream, but they don't let in light. Ceilings drip with the ghosts of the night. The floorboards creak like a final plea. No escape from this toxic symphony. What's in the breeze? What's in the mist? A cocktail of chaos, a venomous twist. No masks, no prayers, no holy cure. At Casa Carlito, you're never pure. Casa Carlito, where the shadows choke. The air is poison, every breath's a joke. Casa Carlito, where the gas clouds blow. One step inside, you're sealing your doom. Casa Carlito, where the shadows choke. The air is poison, every breath's a joke. Casa Carlito, where the gas clouds bloom. One step inside, you're sealing your doom.